So for set design, there's a couple things you want to know. First of all, what is a set? Well, it is a physical environment that supports the story and allows the characters to develop, or a visual metaphor for the themes in the story. In other words, it's the world in which the characters can exist, or the world in which they play and act. So it's not just a backdrop. It can tell the story within the set. It's not just a story that we set in front of it. So there's lots of different elements or set piece options that you can use when designing a set, and these are just a few of them, the main ones that we will be focusing on for the project. So you can mix and match the options to make quick and easy transitions between scenes. Periactoi, fly system, permanent platforms or wagons, area staging, lighting, projections, gobos, backdrops, or small pieces to imply a set and kind of let your audience do the work, rolling large set pieces, and there are many, many more, but these are the ones we're going to focus on. You must use at least 3 of the above set design elements in your set design at the end in order to get full credit. So first off, we have a painted backdrop. This is kind of your most obvious go-to set design option. This is what they used to use back in the day. You do usually need a fly system to use backdrops if you're going to change them in and out frequently. But if you only have one, then it could just hang on whatever pipe or batten you happen to have. But usually you're going to change these out pretty often. Problem with painted backdrops is that they're very time consuming to make. As you can see here in this picture, you've got people literally painstakingly painting by hand every backdrop. Rolling large set pieces, you might notice these are from the musical Shrek. So rolling large set pieces are usually built onto wagons or have casters, or which are what we call the wheels you put on a set piece, onto them. And so they're very easy to change in and out. Usually they're built so that you can also have actors stand on them or walk through them or interact with them. Small set pieces can sometimes imply the setting without having to give every detail away. So here you have a couple window frames hung in the fly system next to the projection of a moon, which is a different element. But the windows kind of imply the fact that there's a wall there. We don't have to show the wall to know that there is one there. Then you have the table and chair set to show that we are in some sort of a restaurant because there's more than one. But again, you don't need every piece of the restaurant to know that's where you are. Your audience is smart. They can fill in the gaps. Then you have something called a flat, which is great for places that don't have fly systems. So these are flat, usually canvas or plywood painted backgrounds that are mounted and stay in place for the duration of a show, or sometimes wheel on and off, but usually they're in place the whole time. So this was a show called The Claw. So they do have one hanging set piece that was there the whole time, which is the claw inside the machine, and everything else is just a painted backdrop to show the areas of the arcade. Then you have periactois. Periactoi is an old set piece tradition from way back in Greek theater, hundreds of years ago, but it is still used today. In fact, we have 5 of them in our theater ourselves because we don't have a fly system. And so we use periactois. They are 3-sided. As you can see, it kind of makes a triangle at the top. 3-sided rolling set pieces that you can paint set designs on each side. And that way you can flip them and rotate them and move them around the stage however you need to. You can use them to make separate entrances. A lot of times theaters outside, when they're like outdoor theaters that don't have a way to mount things or hang things, can use these. And so that way you can create wings with the periactois. You don't need to hang curtains. The periactois work as the curtained winged entrances without being fabric. We use them because you can make all sorts of different locations. In Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we use them for the background of Narnia. Now, we didn't spin them at all. It stayed there the whole time. But a lot of times when we do musicals, we will flip them and use them for many, many different locations throughout the course of the show. Gobos are a lighting design technique. So technically, lighting and set design a lot of times overlap. nowadays, and especially when it comes to projections and gobos. So gobos are metal discs, you can see on the left there, that slide into the lighting fixture between where the light goes through with the lamp and onto whatever surface it's projecting onto. And you can make shapes. So kind of like a shadow puppet. So you project on it different shapes. It can be trees, it can be starry nights, it can be snow, it can be lightning. We've used it for Maui's Hook when we projected that into the sky of stars for Moana. We've used it for A Castle in the Distance when we did that for Narnia and various other princess stories that we've done. Projections are a newer development, and they're still kind of working themselves out. So they don't always work perfectly, because if you think about it with lighting, you do need to have a certain amount of darkness for a projection to show up. So if you think about it in your classrooms, you have projectors. Well, what do you have to do with the lights in the room in order to see what's on the screen? You have to turn the lights out. Otherwise, there's too much light on the screen and you can't see what's being projected. So a lot of times you need what's called a rear projection. And not every theater has that much distance or space behind the white curtain that we call the cyclorama on stage to project the image onto it. And so if you're doing something from the front, you have to have a gap between where the light stops and the projection starts. So if you have a space for that, projections can be really, really effective. Here you see an example from A Christmas Carol with Fezziwig and Company. So that is just a white curtain that they can project onto. Area staging is when you split your stage up into usually no more than about 3 different areas or sections and isolate those areas with your lighting. This is something you can do if you do have a pretty big stage space like we have here. And so if you want to have an outdoor space like you see on stage right with a tree and a bench, if you want to have in center stage a diner scene with a diner counter and 2 stools, and then you want to have a bedroom in your stage left side, you can have several boxes creating a bed with a blanket on top and a pillow. So you would separate those areas with different lighting. You'd have stage right lighting, stage left lighting, and center lighting, and kind of shift from one place or another. The idea here is that you can have many different locations all on stage at the same time. And so you don't have to take blackout pauses to change out the set. You can just kind of shift the lights rather than turning them all to black for your audience. Anytime you have a blackout, it kind of takes the audience out of the moment a little bit. And so you want to try and limit the amount of blackouts if possible, or make sure they are very, very short. Platforms are something you can use to add levels to your stage. You don't just want it to look pretty. You want it to be able to be used so that the actors can be seen, so that you make interesting stage pictures. Those of you that have taken art classes probably know a lot about this, with how much you learn about balance. When you're talking about a painting, you want your paintings and your drawings to have different balances where it's not just all in one corner of the page. You want it to look evenly dispersed and somewhat symmetrical. And so that's something you also want when you're performing on stage and doing the blocking for a scene. So you don't want everyone in one row standing up with people's heads hidden behind other people if you can avoid it. And with platforms, you have that option. You can have people at different levels, some maybe slightly higher, some very high, depends on how much space you have. A fly system, like I mentioned before. So fly system is the go-to. If you have it, it is very useful. So a fly system is simply a pulley system with different weights on the sides that one person or many people will manage by locking those different battens or pipes into place with different weights, and then releasing those weights when you want to lower different things onto the stage. So you can use it to hang lights really easily, then you don't have to get on ladders. But you can also use it to hang different set pieces. So in the top right corner you see there, that's a picture from Marquette High School, actually did Footloose a couple of years back. And they did a scene that took place in a church. But rather than painting a big cathedral backdrop or, stained glass windows, what they did was they had framed windows and a hanging cross that were both pretty flat, 2-dimensional. With a fly system, they do want to be pretty flat. Otherwise, it doesn't work as well. But by doing that, they didn't have to fly them in all the way. It didn't fill the entire stage, but they were able to fly them in just part of the way and give the idea that they were inside of a church without having to completely change the set. And it still left plenty of room for the actors to move around and to sit and be seen. A wagon is just a platform on wheels. So we talked about platforms before, right? So now put a platform on wheels, you got a wagon. And wagons are great when it comes to setting small places or areas that don't have to be changed out. So again, this is a performance of Footloose, and the wagon you see in the back actually has two sides. So the front side that you're seeing is the front porch of their little house. So again, it gives the audience an idea of what the house might look like without seeing an entire house on stage. But then the actors could go through that door, and then when it flipped around, you would see the inside of the house where that door led to. So you would see the wallpaper on the inside, and you would see the other side of the door and what color it was going to be. You can also set a whole area there. We did with Descendants one year. We put a small like desk area at a museum on a wagon that we wheeled on and out. And so we had like the fairy godmother's wand and the rose from Beauty and the Beast and other artifacts, quote unquote, at the museum that were just kind of wheeled on and off. And that way we didn't have to set all these little tiny props. We had them on the wagon. They could wheel on, brakes on, and then wheel off when we were done. So to wrap up, a good set does not just have to be a backdrop or a projection. It has all sorts of things. You might recognize this one. It's Hamilton. So on the left side, you see the model that was built before they actually made the real set. And it came out pretty close to what the model was on the right side. Once you add the lights in, you can see better on the left side. They had a revolving floor. Now that is something that not every theater has. It's very tricky to do right. And you usually do have to have quite a bit of money and resources to get it to work effectively. So revolving stages, though, do offer a lot of opportunities. You can make it look like you're going on a long journey. The Muny has a revolving stage, and they did Fiddler on the Roof one year, and it made it look like the people were traveling out of Anatevka on the revolving stage. It looked like they were moving when in fact they were pretty much staying in the same place. The floor was just moving under them. With Hamilton, you also have a lot of levels. You've got stairs leading up to balconies. You've got other stairs leading even higher up. They also chose to do kind of an exposed brick look. So there are no backdrops. It's just what, colonial New York would have looked like with a lot of brickwork. And so they wanted to get that city vibe without it being super painted and full of backdrops. Everything does not have to be realistic. On the left, you see there's a set piece of a tree, but rather than having a normal tree at the top, they have this giant hula hoop with fabric extended as banners that catches the light and creates basically a projected screen in the back to project different images on. So you kind of have the realistic combined with the fictional fantasy world. On the right side, this is from one of the shows we did. We did Hairspray a few years back. And one of the scenes, they were in a jail cell. And so that jail cell is actually just PVC plastic plumber's piping that we painted silver to look like metal pipes or metal bars in the jail. And the actors actually held it up during that scene because they were supposed to be hanging on the bars. But they were actually physically holding it up. If they had let go, it would have fallen down. But that's something, again, you don't have to make it super realistic in order to get the point across. You don't have to make it super complicated or complex. You don't have to fill the stage with scenery. This is one of the shows we did. It was set in a factory setting, but even with just a couple stools, boxes, chairs, and a platform here or there, you have tons of different levels. Even if they're slightly different by a couple inches here and there, you have lots of different levels, different seating, and it makes it really interesting to look at, even though pretty much the entire set was all just gray furniture. All right, so here we've got several examples of many different combinations of things. Because again, it's not just you pick one and there's your set. You combine the different pieces together to make your puzzle, your set design. So here is a professional version of Legally Blonde. So they have the proscenium stage with lots of different wagons that come together to form the bedroom. So by using a wagon, so you can kind of see there's like little platforms at the bottom there under the desk. And so all of those teeny tiny little set pieces and props can be preset, wheeled on, locked into place, and then wheeled off. Here you have a combination of gobos and permanent fixture set pieces with Beetlejuice. So some of those set pieces are painted with the striped, kind of creepy Beetlejuice vibe, but a lot of that is created by lighting. So a lot of the stripes that you see on the walls and on the floor are created with gobos, and just striped patterns projected onto them. Then you don't need to make everything a right angle. A lot of times, anytime you can have kind of diagonals on your stage, it makes it more interesting to look at, so that a plain old office set here looks a lot cooler than just a desk and a chair, because they have this sloping ceiling built into it. You can have all sorts of metaphorical sets. Here you have, the puppeteer's hand is the set piece. So these people are essentially created in, I believe this was a production of Gulliver's Travels. And so you have, Gulliver arrives in this town where everyone is huge and he is very, very small. And so the set piece had to reflect the size difference between him and all of the other characters. You have to be careful of sight lines. So here you have an example of how they really did a nice job of watching out for adding a second level. So they needed a second level to that bedroom in the top, but they had to have a way to get up there. So they built a staircase, but if they built a regular staircase, then everyone in the front would not be able to see anything behind that staircase. And so what did they do? They built a staircase that had those see-through planks in it, kind of like you see in like the creepy basement stairs, so that you could see through them. So even though there are stairs there, it doesn't create a sightline issue. Here you got another simple set takes place in a park, but I don't need a whole floor of grass to know it's a park. I just need some trees and a fountain, and in this case they have a hot air balloon as well, but you wouldn't need the hot air balloon to know it was in a park. Here you've got a set of Hairspray, a different production. Now this one's fun to look at because those are flats. Those are two-dimensional flats, but it looks 3D because of the way that they cut out the flats with perspective. So they made it look like 5-point perspective, even though every single one of those pieces is a flat surface. And so that's another really cool trick you can do for your audience if you don't have a lot of depth or a very, you don't have much room between upstage and downstage. Here's another example of using periactoids as well as gobos. So they have that marble look onto the pillars, just like they have on the floor, by adding the textured gobo lighting. And then they have periactoids that just give those winged entrances on left and right. This is a model of the Wicked set for the prequel to Wizard of Oz. So this one is fun because it's not super realistic. They wanted to give a vibe of kind of that steampunk fantasy world that wasn't as pretty and perfect as in the Wizard of Oz. And so they used a lot of gears, a lot of metal tones, a lot of, you even have a dragon up at the top that's made what looks like out of metal rather than out of, it's not a realistic looking dragon. It's very clearly a robotic looking dragon. Here you've got different projections. So they projected onto the backdrop clouds to make it look like a setting sky, with some gobos on the floor, as well as several wagons that come on and off. I love this set. So this is the best way to create an area staging set without blocking your sight lines. So they have the frame of a house made with lighting, but then nothing is blocked because there are no walls. It's just the outline of the house. And so no matter where you are in that audience, you can still see what is happening. So genius way of avoiding sightline issues. You can do all sorts of cool things on sets with found objects. Here they have an entire wall created out of reused and recycled windows and doors, and then finding different found resourced wood to create paneled flooring for the stage so that it looks very the reflections of the light are really, really cool with all that glass. Here you have a way to use projections again. So this set is entirely white flat surfaces. And so if you were to put colored lighting on, it would change the set look completely. If you add gobos, it would change the set look completely. Add projections onto things. You can see how they can do that if you look at the Matilda set. Same thing. You've got these very basic cubes with books on them, and then when they project lighting onto them, it can spell out all sorts of letters like Matilda, like other words throughout the show. And so you can use a very, very basic set color wise and then add to it different colors onto it with the lighting and with projections to make it change from scene to scene. A unit set is something we don't see much anymore. A unit set is when you have one set that does not change. And that is really the only time I can really think of using it more often would be a mystery, a murder mystery where it's like a trapped, locked door mystery. And so that's when you have these really elaborate sets that don't change and they stay in the same room and the actors just come in and out of them. But even with a unit set, you can see here, you can even use, you can even use the kind of cutouts so that you can see the creepy dead trees on the outside. So, you know, this isn't just any house. This is probably a pretty spooky house. Maybe in the dead of winter. Then you can use silhouettes a lot of times if you are not the best artist, like I used to be before I had Miss Parker to help me with set design. And so you can use silhouettes to create the illusion of much deeper, distant looks of things. I've done this with like the outline of buildings in a city or with trees and things like that. You want to use levels when possible. This is how to succeed in business without really trying. So it gives the illusion of a big office building where it has all sorts of different offices and cubicles in one building. But how do you make it look like it's a huge building on one stage? Well, maybe you build different cubes that they can use ladders to climb on top of. I think that's pretty much it. The only other thing I would point out is that with if you're trying to do something that is adapted from a specific artistic style. So if for this would be Seussical the Musical. So if you are doing something that comes out of a children's book that has a very specific illustration style, that is something you may want to kind of include in your design. That doesn't mean you're copying or tracing pages out of your book necessarily. That just means you're trying to use the similar kind of drawing so that it looks like, in this case, it looks kind of like a cutout from the book, but everything is still, you know, made to be used. So even the tree that Horton is sitting on, the tree branch is still a three-dimensional tree. It just looks like it's drawn out of a book. Even the cars that they're riding in, you know, they might be flat, but they still can move around the stage. So all of that stuff, even though it is using a similar style of art, it's not just a trace backdrop. Design, and remember that when you do your design, you have to include at least 3 of those elements we just discussed. You can combine them however you want, and you can obviously use more than 3, but your bare minimum is 3 of those different elements, and identifying them in your presentation, that is what I am looking for. I'm not looking for amazing artwork. I'm not looking for fabulous drawings. That's great if you can do that, but that's not what I'm grading. I'm grading your understanding of these different elements and how you can use them in your design.